Thank you for joining our webinar today, Break Glass Theory, Designing a Break Glass Process to Provide Security for Privileged Accounts, with cybersecurity expert Derek A. Smith. You're also joined by BeyondTrust Product Manager Martin Kennard, who will run through a brief overview of BeyondTrust towards the end of the webinar, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. A kind reminder to please submit your questions via the chat box in the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar, and we will cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. So anytime you have a question, just pop it on into the box, and I will be monitoring those throughout the webinar. Also, today's session is being recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the recording and presentation via an email within 2 business days from now. All right, so now that that's all out of the way, I'd like to welcome Derek to the line. Derek, I know you plan to cover a lot today, so please take it away.
Oh, thank you very much, Sarah. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here again today. I love doing these, and hopefully I have some good information that I can share with you today that you can put to work as soon as possible. So as Sarah said, today I'm going to talk about break glass theory and how you can use that within your organization. Now, I don't know how many people have heard about break glass, but if you haven't, I'm going to tell you all about it and everything you need to know today. So let's start by saying this. When you talk about break glass and talk about it in computing terms, not breaking a glass to put out a fire or anything like that, even though that's where it comes from, it's a term used to describe the act of checking out a system account password for use by some type of human user. Well, by a human user, it's not some type. So using this break glass theory, the access controls in an application can be bypassed for a critical emergency that we might have in our organization. So you, I, whoever that user may be, is going to perform a break glass checkout when they need immediate access to an account that they're not authorized to manage. So this method is normally used for the highest level system accounts, such as your root accounts for Unix or your sysadmin accounts for your databases. Now, these accounts are highly privileged, and they're not usually assigned to a specific human. So instead, the break glass is going to limit them by the password duration usually, with the aim, our aim is basically to control and reduce the account usage to that which is absolutely necessary for that person to complete the task. So this presentation I'm going to give you today is going to provide you information and guidance that's going to allow you to successfully utilize this break glass solution that I'm going to talk about today in your environments as an effective emergency access solution. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Before I get into break glass and how we can use it for access control, let's just take a quick look at access control or the access control model in general. All right, so as I have here, access control is basically identifying a person doing a specific job. Now I'll get more into that later. Authenticating that person by looking at their identification, and then giving that person only the key to the door or the computer that they need access to and nothing more. So keep that in mind as I go through this presentation. So with the access control model, organizations use access control mechanisms in order to mitigate the risk of unauthorized access to their data, their resources, and their systems. So several access control models exist. Now, before I get into them, I want to tell you that their corresponding access control mechanisms or the concrete implementations of those access control models can take several forms, and I'll talk about those. They also involve varying degrees of complexity that I'll talk about as well. Now, when we're working with this, in some cases, the more complicated models expand upon and enhance the earlier models that we had out there. So while in other cases they're going to represent a rethinking of the fundamental manner in which access control should be done. So I'm not going to talk about just what you always learn about in CISSP courses or in school. I'm going to expound upon that just a little bit. So in a lot of cases, the newer, more complicated models that we have arose not from deficiencies in those old models or deficiency in the security of those earlier models, but it comes from the need for us to address changes in our organizational structures. Remember, security should be driven by a business, not the other way around. You know, IT should not drive the business. Business drives IT. So basically, we look at the organizational structures, we look at technologies, we look at organizational needs, technical capabilities, all those type of things in order to try to come up with what type of access control model we need. So in order to provide access in a controlled manner, there's a need for a formal definition at an organizational level of the access right according to the roles, the tasks, and the other specific things that we have in our organization. So this should be stated within an access control policy, first of all. You know that everything in your organization is driven by policy. So we state this within an access control policy that's going to express those procedures and those process and those needs that our organization might have. So let's take a quick look at what they are. Of course, we have access control lists. This is one of the older models. All of you are familiar with access control lists. But the concept of this access control list is really very simple. So what we do is that each resource that we have on a system, we're going to have some type of control of those. And that's going to now those system components or those pieces, I'm going to call those our objects, okay? And those objects are going to have its own associated list of mappings between the sets of entities or people or subjects that's going to request access to that resource and the set of actions that each one of those people or entities or resources can take on that resource. For example, each file on a file system might have an associated data structure that's going to hold a list of users that operating system as a whole recognizes, along with a flag that's going to indicate whether each user can read, write, or delete or modify that file, or it can be a combination of those things I just described. So that's the regular old access control list. I move to the next one, that role-based access control. You're all familiar with this, but unlike that access control list I just described, access to a resource now is going to be determined based on the relationship between the requester and the organization or the owner of that data in control of that resource. So in other words, what's going to happen is that the requester's role or that function is going to determine whether access is going to be granted or denied. The third one you see is attribute-based access control. So attribute-based access control is an access control model where the access control decisions are going to be based on a set of characteristics or a set of attributes, of course, because that's what we're talking about. That's going to be associated with that requester or the environment or actually the resources itself. So each attribute is going to be discrete. It's going to be a distinct field that a policy decision point can make a decision on, can basically compare against a set of values in order to determine whether or not to allow or deny access to that attribute. The next one is policy-based access control. So most organizations out there are going to have some type of policy and governance structure in place that's going to ensure the successful execution of that organization's mission to mitigate risk or to ensure accountability or compliance with some type of law or something like that. So this policy is going to be based around that. What are the policies that my organization has to adhere to? And the last one we'll talk about here is risk adaptive access control. So as we all know, everybody on this call knows that our organizations are not static. Our organizations, especially I work for the IRS, by the way, as a government employee as well, as well as other things. So we are constantly evolving and responding to a variety of stimuli. You know, tax law changes every year, you know, so we have to change every year as well. And that can include things like legal requirements, economic and financial realities that we have to deal with, market challenges. There's a variety of risk factors and leadership styles out there that we have to take into consideration. So when we look at this risk adaptive access control, their dynamic nature or the organization's dynamic nature means that the policies that guide them have to also be adaptable. So this naturally is going to extend to our organization's security and access control requirements as well, right? So again, the security is going to be driven by our business. So the security threats that our organizations face are also going to be dynamic. So they have to constantly assess the risk to our IT infrastructure, to their IT infrastructures, and the associated data we have around that. So even the more advanced access control paradigms like that ABAC I told you about, attribute-based and the policy-based, they can't adequately address the need for the dynamics and the changes and the risk levels that we have. So this risk adaptive access control model was devised to bring real-time, adaptable, risk-aware access control to our enterprises. So this is just to get you started and recognizing the different access control models as we apply this break model that we're going to talk about. Now, let's first define break glass. I kind of defined it when I gave you the introduction, but basically it's really, really simple. Break glass refers to a quick means for extending a person's access rights in exceptional cases. And I'm going to give you some examples of those exceptional cases in just a few minutes. But the usage of exceptional access rights need to be documented for later audits and reviews. And I'm going to give you information on how to do that and how to monitor that as well. And these break glass solutions are usually based on some type of authentication that we're going to do of the user, how we authenticate that user. Okay, so this is the definition we're going to keep in mind as we go throughout this presentation. Now, I told you I was going to give you some emergency situations, examples of when break glass emergency access might be necessary. So an emergency access solution should, as you see on the slide, should be used only when our normal processes are insufficient. For instance, if our help desk or our system administrator is not available and they can't help us. Okay? So first, before I give you specific examples, let's look at some problems that we might run across when it comes to using break glass emergency. First of all, we might have account problems. So we might have forgotten usernames or passwords, you know, after somebody's been out, let's say on an extended absence or out on vacation or something like that. We have locked passwords, or they mistype too many times. I do that quite often. No user accounts. You know, if it's a hospital setting, we might have a doctor or come in from another organization, or a new clinician who's assisting a facility during an emergency and he has to get access to something on the computer, a lot of different things. The second one you see is authentication system problems. So central authentication system failure might happen. Our authentication system might go down and we can't authenticate that doctor or lawyer or whoever it is onto the system. Okay? Our smart card or our biometrics reader might fail or become damaged. Now note, for authentication, I just want to make a note that in cases where that authentication system fails, there needs to be an alternate authentication mechanism, such as a username or password, of course, that we can get in. But the last bullet you see is authorization problems. So an emergency medical situation, for instance, thrusts an individual into a role where he or she lacks sufficient access rights. So your administrative assistant might be entering orders into a computer during an emergency and they have to get access while you go through the emergency if you're a doctor. But I'll talk more about that as I get into a couple more examples in a second here. So, as I was saying, in a lot of organization or organizational environments, some critical tasks exist, which in exceptional cases, which is what we're talking about, they have to be performed by a person, although that person is usually not permitted to perform those tasks on a usual basis, right? So I told you I was going to give you an example. For example, if a deadline is about to expire and you have a senior lawyer and that person is not available, and you have a junior lawyer, that junior lawyer might be authorized to submit a written objection to the court in order to avoid damage to the company, for instance. Or in case of emergency in a plant, let's say, that machine operator is going to be authorized to switch production machines into an emergency state in order to ensure safety for personnel and machinery. We need to act now, right? Or again, I like to talk about hospitals because you see this a lot in hospital situations. But in a hospital context, you might have a junior physician who's going to be able to perform certain tasks of that senior physician in case of emergency. And then accordingly, there's a need to provide mechanisms that's going to help coordinate exception handling activities. Now remember, break glass emergencies are all about exception handling and how we as security folks or you as a company owner or IT professional are going to handle those exceptions. So let's look at the break glass solution and how that might work, how we can use that. So again, the break glass solution, as I was saying before, is basically based on what we call a pre-stage emergency user account. It already has to be set up, okay? It has to be a pre-stage emergency user account, it has to be managed, and it has to be distributed in a way that can make them quickly available without unreasonable administrative delay. Remember, this is an emergency, so we need to be able to get to it quickly. So this solution that we're going to put in place should have three things. It should be simple, it should be effective, and it should be reliable, okay? So with that, I want to get into how we pre-stage these accounts and what we need to do around that. So if we have an emergency accounts, they should be created in advance. And I already told you that. We can't wait till we need it to decide how we're going to create this thing. So they need to be created in advance in order to allow careful thought to go into the access control and careful audit trails to be set up and associated with them. Because it's very important for us to audit this thing. Whenever we use it, we need to make sure it's recorded well. And I'll tell you why in just a little while. So the following factors that I have right here on the slide should be considered. Now, I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but this is something you can take into consideration. A, I have the username should be obvious and meaningful. You want to have something like, let's say, breakglass01 or something like that. So the point is, the account name would be inappropriate for somebody to use under normal operations, and it would stand out in the audit trail. So if you or I, as a security folks, we're looking through the audit trail and we see something like breakglass01, breakglass02, we know that somebody had to implement that emergency procedure that we put in place. B says passwords should be hard to guess or crack. So those strong passwords, just like anything else in security, should be implemented. But it's important, you know, it's important that they not be so difficult that in an emergency that user will have trouble entering it. Okay, so we want strong passwords, but we got to consider why we have this once again. And this is somebody that usually is not doing this job, and now he or she is in an emergency situation. C, account permissions should be set to minimum necessary privilege based on the results of a risk assessment, as I have here on the slide. But basically what we want to do is we want to limit that emergency access to the minimum data and the minimum functionality that that person needs to perform the task. So this could potentially include something like view-only capability or prohibiting access from outside the local console or the local network. So somebody else can't access this thing from outside, a hacker or something, and use your emergency features. Basically, you make it on a local console or local network. It could mean limiting to data acquisition only or prohibiting access to previously secured, I'm sorry, not previously secured, but previously acquired data, something they've gotten before. But due to the difficulty of us trying to anticipate those emergency needs, we might have to choose to allow full access to emergency accounts. But we want to be very careful when we're doing that. You know, you and I cannot sit here and anticipate every emergency situation and then build a controller, build a rule around that. So we have to figure out what's going to work best for our particular organization. Now, next thing I have is auditing should be enabled. So you need to enable auditing if you have it available. And I'm telling you it should be available, and I'll talk more about that later. You want to be able to log details of that account usage that we have and the details of the work that we're carrying out while we're using that account. So not only do I want to know that Derek went into this account, but you need to know what Derek was doing while he was in that account. What was I using that for? Okay. Now, some of the systems out there might recognize the emergency accounts, and then it might raise the system auditing level up or increase the audit logging only the emergency accounts. I'll talk more about that in a little while too. So basically you want to have triggers. You want to have something that's going to alert folks that this emergency process has gone into play, and I'll talk about that in the monitoring piece. Now note, what I want to say here is that you want to ensure that the individuals that you have out there who create those accounts, they're not the same ones reviewing the audit trails, so this could be a source of abuse, of course. You know, you should have independent auditing of this. All right? Now, those break glass accounts that I have and the distribution procedures that you put in place need to be documented, of course, just like anything else we do in security, and they need to be tested as part of the implementation. So just like all the tests that we always advise people to do in security, we should test this break glass solution as well. So we have the pre-staging accounts, and then we have the distribution of those accounts or distributing those accounts. So those pre-stage accounts that I talked about need to be carefully managed in order for us to provide timely access to them when it's needed. When we look at break glass requires us, or requires that emergency account details that we have be made available in an appropriate and a reasonable manner for everybody that's using it, and especially for us as security people. So these details can be provided on some type of media, like a printed page, or a magnetic strip card, or a smart card, or a token, or something like that. But some and we have other distribution possibilities too. And here are some of the ones that we have. This is just possibilities. You don't have to have all these in place that I have up there, A through E. This is just some ideas that you might have for putting yours in place. So the first one I have is kept behind glass in the cabinet. So you want to keep it behind glass in the cabinet where access to those accounts require us to literally go out and break the glass, just like you would do to a fire extinguisher or a fire alarm. You break the glass. So what this is going to do for us is that it's going to provide an obvious indication that the accounts have been accessed, and it's also going to be a deterrent for folks so they won't have casual use of this. You know, if they have to break the glass to really make this happen, they'll think twice before doing it, we hope. That's one way of doing it. Another way is that we can maintain it within sealed envelopes, like I used to do back in the military. We used to have passwords, and we put the password in an envelope, and we'd seal it. And if not passwords, I'm sorry, combinations to safe. And if somebody lost the combination, we can go to our security guy, and he'll open up the envelope at that time, and he'll pull out the combination. So here's the same concept, where a broken seal for us is going to be an obvious indication that that account has been accessed, and so we want to know. The third one is locked in a desk drawer that only specific people can access. All right, so I want to put it in a desk drawer, kind of like that sealed envelope, and only certain people would get it. That's pretty self-explanatory. The next one is sealed and taped on the side of a monitor. So it could be sealed, if you're in a hospital, let's say, it could be sealed and taped to the side of a monitor in your clinical area that the doctors and nurses and everybody else are working in. So it's going to be visible to many so that it would be obvious when it's missing or damaged and somebody can say something about it. Okay? The next one, for cases where more than one person is needed to declare that emergency, it can be locked in a safe or a cabinet where one person knows the combination, but the cabinet key, or they might have the cabinet key, and then a different person has the key to the room. So a different person lets you in, I go over to the cabinet, I open it up, and I take out the emergency procedures. A best practice for doing this would place that pre-stage emergency account into the responsible care of an individual. So I'm going to set up something where I have an emergency account manager, let's say, and that person is going to be readily available during operating hours, and that person is also going to understand the sensitivity and the priority of those emergency accounts. So it might be a branch, not a brand, but business manager. It could be a branch manager. It could be a charge nurse or a doctor. It could be a security officer, whoever you choose for the particular type of operation you all have. Okay? And then that distribution procedure that I set up is going to include some type of sign-out method that's going to require that an acceptable form of identification is provided so I can know exactly who it is accessing this thing. That identity is going to be recorded before those accounts are made available to that person. And then following such a procedure, when I do these things and put this in place, it's going to assure to me that the activities performed using that emergency account might eventually be associated with an authorized individual. It's going to create some type of accountability for me, and it's also going to assure non-repudiation. I know all you computer folks know what non-repudiation is, but just in case, it means that I cannot deny that I used this break glass solution. Okay, it's going to provide some, I did it, Derek did it, just like when we send an email and we have non-repudiation there, right? So this is how we might distribute those accounts. Now continue on like that. As I mentioned already, break glass is based on that pre-stage emergency user accounts that I talked about. And it's going to be managed in a way that can make that information or those accounts available with reasonable administrative overhead. So this solution that I'm proposing can be used with a broad range of existing systems and different types of architectures that require operators to first log in, such as with their username or their password, before access is granted. So the break glass process is going to be intended for us to specifically cover emergency cases, and it should not be used as a replacement for a help desk. So I don't want you all going out there and setting this thing up and say, you know, I don't know the password, so I'm just going to use the break glass solution. That's not what it's used for. It's used for when it's a true emergency, all right? This is what their process might look like. So I, as a user, I perform a break glass checkout. First of all, let me take a step back. I have an emergency. I have to get to this password, and I have to get to it quickly, or the system quickly. So I'm going to perform a break glass checkout when I need immediate access to that account, even though I'm not authorized to manage it. Now, in that break glass checkout process that I'm going through, I'm going to make a notification message, or I shouldn't say I'm going to do it. I want it to happen automatically through a PAM or something like that. I'll talk about PAMs in just a little while. Privileged account management, I'll talk about that. But I'm going to want to have, what was I saying, a notification message sent out to the administrator. And that's going to inform the administrator that that break glass checkout process has occurred. Now, the administrator cannot approve it, and they don't have the authority to stop it and say, no, 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 don't do that. Basically, it's just letting them know that we've put this process in place, or we've initiated the break glass process. And then the most important thing, not the most important, but one of the most important things is that checked out break glass account is going to be logged. And as I have here as a note, only user with the break glass privileged access role can perform the break glass process. So that's kind of what it would look like in a real life situation. All right, so the next slide here I have, I told you it's very important for us to keep an eye on what's happening with these break glass accounts. So the use of these emergency accounts need to be carefully monitored. And then audit mechanisms need to be put in place or should be used, and a procedure defined for us to examine the security audit trails on a regular basis. And I know if you, like most people that I've seen out in the field, we don't like doing audits. We don't like looking at audit logs and things like that. But this is another reason why you need to look at audit logs, so you can identify that break glass 01 or something is in there, okay? So you want to go in and do this on a regular basis and to identify any use of those emergency accounts that we're talking about. And in addition to that, systems also can alert that security administrator in the event of an emergency account is activated. As I told you, it should be an automatic process that we use. And then now, you know, break glass is a little bit different than our normal access control procedures. So these enhanced capabilities are highly desirable for an organization, but they're not required. You know, these procedures I'm talking about, these audit trails and all that kind of stuff, I would like to see you put that into your program, but they're not required for the break glass mechanism to work. I don't have to have it. I just need to have the mechanism in place. So if that system that I have or that application software that I'm using can't provide an audit trail for me that shows, you know, simple account activity like log-on attempts and things like that, if you don't have an audit trail or a way to audit this, I would recommend that you rethink your use of break glass. You know, you need to carefully consider it before you implement break glass into your organization. Break glass might still have a valid, remain a valid system for you within your organization, but it's going to require you to use some type of manual log if you don't have some type of automatic or IT-related log. Okay, paper and pencil. To have a form down there. If you have to use the process, write it down. I use it on this date, and this is what I use it for. But it needs to be audited. And I'm going to talk about why in just a little while. But you got HIPAA compliance, you got high-tech compliance if it's medical field and things like that. But stepping back to here, documentation, when you do all this, the documentation I have, it needs to describe the intended use of those break glass accounts or those emergency accounts. And not only that, but that documentation needs to tell the people who's going to use it the consequences that they're going to have if they use them inappropriately. So keep that in mind for your documentation. Now the details that I have needs to be clearly documented, and then they need to be clearly communicated to the relevant workforce, just like any policies, any procedures that we have out there. And it needs to be clear that all use of those emergency accounts is going to be closely monitored by us, the security folks, right? And then we need to go in and do a periodic review and even retraining of the staff to make sure that the break glass procedure continues to be relevant. So if I was you, when you do your yearly awareness training, if you have a break glass procedure, you want to add that to your yearly awareness training. So that's just my recommendation. Now, continue with the monitoring. Each use of that emergency account needs to be reviewed by us, the professionals, or whoever it is, the manager, whoever you put in charge of this thing. I gave you a title of a guy. I can't remember what I told you, but I gave you a title of somebody that could be your emergency manager or whatever I called it. So the use of an emergency account might be valid. Well, let me take a step back. The reason you want to review this, because you might see a valid use of this emergency account, excuse me, or it could indicate a malicious act. If we're looking at it from that point of view, it could be an insider threat, it could be a hacker or something like that trying to utilize that emergency access if they were able to find it. So what happens is that any unacceptable use has to be recorded, and then we have to act upon it as security professionals. And then another thing you want to look for, I think is important, is that frequent use of those emergency procedures might indicate another problem, right? It might indicate that you have problems with your normal user authentication mechanism, right? So this regular monitoring of those pre-stage emergency accounts is going to provide you with some important information. Now, it also should include exercising some of these things that I talked about, you know, reviewing, auditing, and all that, to ensure that your procedure actually does work. Remember I told you should test all your procedures? You want to ensure that they actually do work and that their use can be detected. Okay, if you're looking at security, if that alert actually should be sent out and somebody should be able to see that alert. Okay, so this is similar. If we want to put it in simple terms, it's similar to when we test our fire alarms. We want to make sure that they're going to work in the real life emergency or in the real world. We should do the same thing with this break glass account. Now, after we use that account, we have to maintain it as well. So a procedure needs to be established for us to clean up that account, to clean up after the emergency account has been used. So we want to consider addressing the following things that I have here. First of all, you want to disable or delete the emergency accounts. So, when you use this account, or they were used to prevent, well, let me take a step back. So if I disable or delete the emergency account, right, I can't leave it open for people to continue to use it, right? So what I have to do is I have to get rid of it in order to prevent something called reuse, and all you security people know what reuse is. So now that that password is known, a bad guy or even a doctor who just want to get back in the system, whoever it may be, the factory worker, whatever, they can reuse that password again if it's known. So we have to make sure that we disable or we delete it. Now, some systems might be capable of automatically deactivating those emergency accounts after its first use or passage of some type of selected period that we set up, like 8 hours or 1 day or something like that. Now, we want to avoid disabling that account during the period of emergency use, though. So when you put 8 hours in, be cognizant that if the emergency goes longer than 8 hours, you don't want the person to be kicked out of the system. You need to make sure that it continues on. Second thing I have here is reconcile the data acquired in audit trails to reflect the proper operator's name. Okay, so you want to make sure that whoever used that account, his name is captured, or a user ID or something is captured for identification purposes. The next one is make entries and disclosures if appropriate. So this is where I was talking about HIPAA. If you have HIPAA policy or something like that, procedure forms that you might have to fill out, you want to make sure that you disclose the use of this break glass account to those people who need to see it. The next one is review activities performed, including the data acquired and the data that was accessed by that person. Next is determine if the emergency account procedure and operation worked effectively, and if it didn't work effectively, what do? We adjust it as necessary. We make changes to it so that next time it will work. And the last one is create and distribute new accounts for future break glass use. Again, that goes with number one. After we disable or delete that account, of course, we need to build a new one in case we have a problem, next week and the same type of thing occur or another emergency occurs. Now, a little bit more about break glass policy. These break glass policies are introduced as a sophisticated exception handling mechanism. Like I said before, it's all about exception handling for access control policies. Now, what they do, they don't replace your old policies. What they do is they supplement those ordinary access control policies in order for us to be able to control overriding those access rights. I don't want to just be willy-nilly that somebody can go into this thing. So you should only make the use of your break glass policies if a regular task execution is not available. Again, there's no authorized person available for them to open that system for you. So if your break glass policy is activated, the resulting task execution has to be carefully recorded for later audit and review. And I keep stressing that. It needs to be audited, and we need to review those audits on a regular basis. So typically, we're going to have some type of special review process in place that's only going to be triggered if we see break glass executions, let's say. So with that, These are some of the things that I think you should have in place for your your break glass policy. First of all, you should have maximum freedom. And what that means is that the system has to be able to provide mechanisms for the users to access the requested information at all times, whenever it's needed. Again, it's an emergency situation, but it needs to be there so if I need it, it's easy for me to get to. The next thing I have is maximum responsibility. So the system has to provide mechanisms that's going to show that user who takes that exceptional action, who goes out and uses that emergency situation, the system is going to have to provide me with an alert message making me aware or making my security guy aware, whoever is responsible, making that person aware that he is, I'm sorry, let me take a step back. So it's not for the person that I want to make aware, it's for the person that's actually using it, okay? So what I'm trying to say is that there's going to be some type of alert message that's going to make that person aware that he's trying to access information he's not authorized to see. So some type of banner should pop up or something saying, hey, you're going to use this break glass solution. This is not something you authorize, but they still can do it because they have the special password. So what does that do for us? That's going to make that person responsible for what he's doing and all the actions that he might take afterwards, after he does whatever he's doing. So that system has to provide us a mechanism to notify all of those responsible parties, and those notifications need to be automatic. Okay, it needs to shoot it out to me. My pager, well, I don't have a pager anymore, but you know, my phone or whatever goes off. So a note here though, if we are going to have that type of mechanism, it's going to require a definition of the responsibility hierarchy for each department. Meaning this, who do I contact? If it's a certain department, finance, HR, the hospital, whatever, who's to get contacted? Like your call tree that we're all familiar with. Okay? So as you see on my slide, the third bullet point, the following are the steps needed in order to implement this break the glass policy. Number one, the user should be authorized to access the system in the first place. So the user is authorized to access the system, and then once he gets in, search for information. And number two, that authorization model that we choose is going to verify whether that user has access to the requested information. So not only could he get in, but is he supposed to access that information? The third thing, the model that we have, once that person goes in, it should come out and it should return a yes or no according to that user profile. So if it comes back and says no, Derek shouldn't be in there, it shows that basically I can still access the requested information by breaking the glass. Remember, I'm not supposed to be in this system, but it's an emergency situation, so I have to get in. So it's still going to allow me in by breaking the glass, but I'm going to know that all my actions are going to be recorded and that non-repudiation mechanisms are in place. So they're going to know that Derek was in there, and they're going to want to know why I was in there. Number four, the system is frozen until the user agrees or not with the break glass policy and chooses a reason for doing it. So once I go into my system and it's about to give me the information, it stops and I have to hit something that says I agree that I'm being monitored and I have to explain why I'm doing this, let's say. Okay. Number five is that if I break the glass, that hierarchy model that I was telling you about is going to verify who it needs to notify, and then it's going to go out and notify that person. So security should be getting a phone call or some type of alert saying that Derek is in this system. And the last thing, all notifications and all user actions are going to be registered automatically again for auditing purposes. So this is the policy piece of it. Okay. Let's move over into one more thing that I want to talk about, and this is about privileged accounts, privilege management, and that type of thing. So basically, I told you that a lot of this stuff should be, well, I'll tell you what, I'm sorry. I want to take one step back. There's something else I want to emphasize about policies here. So I told you about policy and what should be there. Now we have to implement this, right? And how do we implement this break glass policy and these procedures? So in terms of implementation, the process of searching for information about whatever you're doing, let's say a hospital again, about patient information, that needs to be complemented with an underlying request to the authorization infrastructure about the user's permission. So it needs to figure out, why is Derek in this? Why does he have permission to get in there? And what will he still be able to access? Because I don't want me as an insider insider threat to be able to access things that I shouldn't be accessing, and I'm about to go out the door. So what we do is that we put a procedure in place, and this is done with a procedure that's going to check my user profile, and it's going to check the department that I work in, and then it's going to decide whether it should raise that break the glass policy or not, depending upon whether access is denied or not. So again, remember I told you the emergency situation, but even with that emergency situation, I want to put something in place that's going to say where Derek actually does work at this facility, and Derek has access to certain rights at this facility, so so yes, give him access. Or I wanted to go in and recognize, I might be in a hospital and see this thing stuck to the side of a computer, and I want to get into the computer. I wanted to look and say, well, Derek does not even work at this facility, and so even with this break glass policy in place, or this break glass access, we shouldn't give him access. So I want the system to look at that. I want the system to make that kind of determination if it's possible. And we're able to set this up with the PAMs, or the privileged access management, that I'm going to talk about now. So with privileged access management, I think all you know what it is, but basically let me just give you a brief overview. With this privileged access management, or this PAM system, I'm going to say PAM because I'm going to use PAM a few times, but it's all about locking your root or your admin credentials up in a hardened vault, let's call it, and then tightly controlling access to that vault so as to increase your security or your assurance around your access control procedures or your access control practices that you have in your organization. So in order to protect my organization's most critical systems from breach, that PAM system is going to be one of the top solutions that I want to have in place. I don't want to just depend on a person or a sysadmin or an individual security guy to be there to work all these processes. I'd rather have this entire thing automated. Now, these PAM password vaults, as I call them, they're going to provide that extra layer of control over all my privilege administration and password policies that I might have in my organization. And it's also going to control the detailed audit trails that I keep harping on privilege access. So in addition to controlling that use and that distribution and the change of my passwords that I have in my vault, my PAM solution is also going to broker my sessions to my systems or to my databases so that the privileged user never even sees the password or credentials, right? I don't have to put in the password or credentials. Basically, my password manager or my privileged access manager is going to do all that for me. But like anything else, that adds additional steps to my IT process. And my PAM or my privileged access management or my means of accessing my privileged access management could fail. So what I mean here is this. Remember, if I need emergency access, it might be because the power is out or something else has happened. So we just got to keep those things in consideration as well. Let me give you a what if. So what if you have an administrator and that person is not able to log on to my password vault, which is my PAM, where my administrative credentials to my root or my admin accounts are kept? What do I do then? So my password administration would not be able to get to those credentials or to that brokered section that I'm looking for to administer production systems. So now the inability of that administrator to administer those systems, such as my websites or my databases or my application servers or what have you, could eventually cause an outage of my mission control or my mission critical systems or my customer facing services. So things I got to take, even with this break glass, there's things I have to take into consideration for privileged access management. So in this case I just gave you, this is a case where designing a break glass process can ensure that my administrators have a backup process to be able to get credentials out of that vault in an emergency. So even if I have PAM problems, this break glass is going to give me some type of assurance that we can still continue to operate. Now, I am not the expert on privileged access management. So what I want to do now is I want to bring on the expert. So my partner Martin is going to come on. He's going to tell you a little bit more about privileged access management, and he's also going to tell you about our solution or his solution, their solution for how to deal with this type of situation. So Martin, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Derek. Really appreciate it. So that was a great talk. I mean, to say this, break glass is something that comes up very, very frequently. I mean, I have to say, like in the last year, I've had many break glass conversations with customers, and not just sort of break glass in terms of to the operating system, but break glass of our product as well. There's obviously, there's sometimes a lot of confusion. People will say, okay, I need to talk about break glass. And, it turns out that they're saying, well, what happens if your password management system goes down? How do we get access to our passwords? What's our backup plan? So there's many different facets to it. So, basically, I mean, as mentioned, I mean, one of the key things that we're able to do with the Beyond Trust range of products is, manage your password. So we've got password management, SSH key management. We also do AD bridging. We also do delegation for least privilege. But the ultimate thing is we also tie that into session management. So our password management solution and session management solution are tied together. They're basically one and the same. Now the way that it works is, this is allowing you to be able to control all of those accounts, the privileged accounts that you might have to give break glass access to. But it's not only just providing the policy to say how they get there, we can record what goes on within those sessions. If something does something, something nefarious or something bad happens, then, we got the ability to be able to pick that up or alert someone. So, ultimately the product, allows you to do password management for any operating system, host, hypervisor, network device, pretty well anything that has a password repository, any directory. We got the ability to manage service accounts, restart services. We can have we have an A2A interface. And as well as the SSH key management, as I said, the session management controls, how users actually get in. Now, to illustrate that, let's say, for example, somebody who actually wants to get access. It could be the middle of the night. They log on using a set of credentials, which identifies them as a break glass user. Okay. So, what will happen is, password safe, we'll challenge them. I mean, maybe there's some sort of second factor they got to put in. Maybe it'll generate an alert out to somebody to say, yep, okay, break glass is being invoked. And the user, will ultimately request access to a system. Now, instead of giving the password out to the user, which you would normally expect with a password management system, we automatically launch MSTSC, PuTTY, Reflection, Mobile Extern, whatever you happen to use, any SSH or RDB client. We launch it on your desktop, and we will log the user directly into the proxy. Now, this is very secure. No credentials are ever passed down to to your client. I mean, there's no username, no password, no host name, nothing like that is sent down. Now, the key thing is here is that the proxy knows where the session key that it's used to log on actually has to go to. So it makes that inbound connection for you, and we actually inject the credentials into the data stream. So that means that nothing ever comes down to the user or to that desktop, so you're not compromising any of your privileged accounts, and you've got full control and alert over that session. Now, the other thing that we can also do, as a good example, is we can also audit every single keystroke and every single action. So everything the user types, whether they type MMC, whether they left click on a control or a window, everything gets audited. You've got the ability to do snapshotting. If you want to be able to do like forensic auditing, we'll produce a snapshot with index information. You have the ability to be able to change your replay speed. And then also, very importantly, especially if you're banking or financial, is we got the ability for you to be able to add comments to it. So, and you can even mark it as reviewed. So when your SAT 70 audits come up, you can go back to your auditors and say, look, okay, here's what my users have been doing. I've gone in, my managers are doing their due diligence and they're checking these recordings on a regular basis. Now, the key to all of this sort of secret sauce, something we call adaptive workflow control. And, this is really, really simple. I mean, you've got groups of users. So, I got groups of like Active Directory, groups here at the moment. I have also groups of managed accounts, so I've already got groups of, for example, my Linux systems, my Unix systems, my Mac managed accounts, Windows managed accounts. But what I can do is I can apply an access policy. And within the access policy, I can then say this group of users can access this group of accounts between these hours, for example, 8:30 to 6:30 every day. If required, I can put an end date onto that, so we can only access it unto this date. And also I'm going to restrict it from to a particular location. So if I'm, working Firecall tonight, then you'd expect me to come in over the VPN concentrator. You wouldn't expect me to come in via a different mechanism, or even, from within the corporate network if I'm supposed to be home, because that, somebody might be trying to leverage a set of credentials in order to be able to log in by traversing through an organization. So, it's really sort of, the adaptive workflow control takes all of these aspects of who you are, where you are, the day, the date, the time, and applies it to that just-in-time moment of when you're trying to log in, and that will determine ultimately the accounts that you see. Now, once you log in, we can also pre-launch applications. So, you need to be actually, reboot the ESX machine, or, get in, provide maintenance. Well, we can be managing your ESX accounts. We can log you into vSphere automatically, and guess what? We can also record all that information, and everything that the user's doing, all the mouse movements. Doesn't matter whether it's a fat app or a web app or a thin app. Anything is recorded. We can also do exactly the same thing for Unix, Linux. So it doesn't matter whether you're a DB administrator going into, SQL Dev, or, anybody going to a SQL Server Management Studio. I mean, I suppose it's Windows really, but, any sort of any Unix, Linux application and a Windows application, we have the ability to be able to launch those automatically and play in the credentials so the user never sees it. We just launch the application and record all of that activity. I mean, another big thing that we do is, obviously, as well as the real-time alerting, is also the reporting as well. So, I mean, as you can imagine, with any system like this, it's a tier 1 system. So it's got to be highly available, it's got to be highly responsive. So, we've got a lot of checks and balances in the system to see, how your rules being used, when are all your password changes happening, do you have any particularly high thresholds, that may cause the system to slow down, maybe due to, the fact you might have an incorrect policy set, for your passwords. We can tell you what your users are doing, where all your service accounts are distributed, and even actually analyze all of the accounts in your environment. We can go out, scan your network, we can show you all your systems, show you all your accounts, and we can tell you which one specifically, may actually be in jeopardy. Do you have any service accounts out there that maybe the password hasn't been changed for 2 years? Maybe it hasn't been logged onto for a year. Okay, do you still need it? Is it in tag vector? We can also, actually do threat analytics. So this is built into the system. So we can actually look for anomalies, I mean, different patterns of behavior. If, a certain thing, so a user logs onto a system in an untrusted way, they use an application they haven't used before, that they try to, perform actions on different hosts. These are all things that will then elevate up the threat level. So, ultimately, when we look at it, it's the adaptive workflow control that makes it very, very different. We've got those built-in network scanning capabilities. It is a full data warehouse. All the analytics are built in. We can pull in all of all of the Beyond Trust products into this application. We have something called Smart Rules, which allows you to automatically and dynamically build permission sets. Everything that you saw, that I've just run through at the moment on this demonstration, or presentation rather, this is all included. There's no additional cost for the session management, no different, additional costs for privilege for analytics. All the APIs are free. And lastly, I mean, it's very easy to use. You can have the best system in the world. If people don't adopt it because it's complicated, well, it's a waste of time putting it in the first place. So, it's clean, uncluttered, and intuitive. Now, it's not just us, that think it's great. The analysts think we're great too. So, within the recent Forrester Wave report, we were identified as a leader, in terms of our space. There's a lot of great things, that has been validated by a lot of different third parties. So ultimately, I would normally actually jump in and actually do a demo. You know what? Actually, we got 4 minutes, so let's just give you a quick sort of 4-minute overview of the access policy. And then we'll have a couple of minutes Q&A. I just want to sort of demonstrate what the access policy looks like. So this is where ultimately you can actually create something like a break glass. So I can say, here's my break glass policy. But what I can also do is say that during this policy, I can, first of all, I can be alerted when it gets invoked, but I can also set it up so I can say that I want a particular connection profile. Now, what the connection profile does is command blocking, and it actually looks at all the commands that were executed. So I can look at keywords, host names, IP addresses in the session, and then I got the choice of just sending me an email alert. I can block the command, so stop it from being executed. I can block and lock the session, just lock the session, or I can terminate the session. So it's not only, are we controlling how the users get into your environment, we're also controlling what they do when they get there. So if I log in during the day from the corporate environment, I can access these accounts. I can do these sorts of things. If I log in during the middle of the night as a break glass admin, I've got access to these different accounts, and I can also got access to different actions. So again, it's full control and full ability to be able to alert. So with that, what I'll do is pass it back to Sarah to open up the poll, please.
Thank you. That was the world's fastest demo, Martin. Good job. Okay, guys, so we'll jump right into Q&A, but at this point, I'd like to jump into our last poll. And here at Beyond Trust, we want to make you guys security rock stars, and we would love to help you with your privileged access and vulnerability management needs. So would you be interested in engaging with one of our security experts further? We want to help you, and we'd love to chat. So let us know and select yes. I'll leave this up, and we'll dive right into questions. Let's see, Derek, you gave examples of having quote-unquote break glass mode in healthcare IT applications. In this mode, you stated that the access controls in an application can be bypassed for an emergency when it's critical for a user to gain access. And you stated that typically the facility will have some sort of policy in place to justify using the mode after the fact. And I'm wondering if many facilities are demanding this feature in healthcare applications. I don't recall seeing this in many real applications.
Hi, thanks. Good question. So basically, I worked at a healthcare organization that used this break glass process. Now, I worked on the IT side of things, so I wasn't a doctor or anything like that, so I don't know how it applied to clinicians. But for us, it was set up so that if we access any patient record, we're required that required the break glass process, it had to be logged. So in doing so, we were forced to enter a comment as to why we needed to access that record. Remember, I kept emphasizing tracking purposes. They definitely wanted to track it. Why is that? Because it was a good feature with the introduction of high-tech I told you about before the High-Tech Act, and of course with HIPAA and things like that. So it's important for us to document why you went to that patient's chart. So as a patient, which all you are a patient at some time, you have the right to request the names of all the employees who access your medical record. And by forcing the break glass feature, the employees are going to be forced to create that documentation. And therefore, if you all ask for it, it's going to be needed. So in short, no, it's not required, but it's an excellent way for our organizations to mitigate risk. It could be healthcare or any other type of organization, not only for your organization, but for those individuals going to be held liable for things like high-tech and HIPAA. So again, it's not required, but I highly recommend it.
Martin, is profile cached on systems for offline field systems?
Is profile tasks on systems for offline? Oh,
yeah. Is profile? Yes. I'm assuming is the profile cached on systems for offline field systems?
So, the way that the proxy works is you're dynamically connecting to it. So, when it comes to offline, we can actually handle that through a couple of modules. We've got a couple of offline host modules that we can put on. So, potentially, rather than actually having to do the command blocking through password safe, we've actually got a module that you can install on Windows, you can install on Unix, Linux, that will also be able to lock down and audit all the activities. So even if you're offline and someone's connecting, you've got the ability to be able to do that. So so it's not within what I demoed, but absolutely you can do that.
Okay, we have time for just one more question. I know we are over the hour limit, but Derek, should different break glass user IDs be created for different project groups or activities?
Yes. So basically for each activity or project or person or group you have, a set of user IDs can be defined with different access rights. So you want different people to have different access to things like patient records. So that's going to ensure that when you have break glass and that access is assigned, that user, again, we talk about least privilege, that user is only going to be given the necessary privileges they need to do the task that they're assigned to do or they're trying to do. So yes, we definitely should have different user IDs used through a system like Martin demonstrated in order to control that.
Okay, guys, we need to wrap this up. We're 2 minutes over. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Just a reminder, I did receive a couple of questions asking about the recording and the follow-up and if they get the slides. And yes, you will receive an email with a link to the slides shown here today, plus the recording within 2 business days from now, and it will come from our email alias communications@beyondtrust.com. So make sure that email is whitelisted so you receive it without interruption. A big thanks again to both Derek and Martin. Thank you, gentlemen, and all who attended live today. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you at the next one. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.